Well, hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Political State Podcast from the Oklahoman. I'm Ben Felder here in the Oklahomans podcast studio, and after a few weeks off, we're back at it with another episode talking politics here in the Sooner State. Joining me here in the studio is our state capitol reporter, Carmen Foreman, and our federal government reporter, Chris Castile. How are you guys?
Good. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, you bet. Well, it's your show too, so you're always welcome here. Off for a few weeks. Carmen, we've been to Mexico City in between that time. No, not together, separate trips, but we both vacationed separately in Mexico City. Chris, did you go anywhere?
I did not. I've been here holding down the fort. I'm glad you guys had a good time.
Yeah.
Well, you have to go to Mexico City when you go on vacation now.
We'll get out sometime.
All right.
Especially before things get too busy with federal elections and stuff like that are already underway. But a lot to talk about in politics. We could spend a show catching up on the things the last few weeks, but enough to keep us busy this week, including maybe a little college football fever from the governor, name dropping a former, I'm guessing not great, coach of the Sooners.
The worst ever, maybe.
John Blake, that I had to look up. I'm not from Oklahoma, didn't go to OU. But Carmen, you went to OU. I don't know if you were. Did you know John Blake?
I did not. I'm young, and I am also not the largest OU football fan. Shh, don't tell anybody. I like to spend my Saturdays in other ways.
We'll keep that between us, Carmen.
Open on Sunday this year, so you can still do something on Saturday. But so this week, the Oklahomans' Nolan Clay reported that Governor Kevin Stitt would like to replace Glenn Johnson as the state's higher education chancellor. So Jody Parker, who's the chair of the state regents, which oversees the chancellor, expressed support for Johnson. But in that story, Stitt, when asked about this, his quote was, speaking about Johnson, was, "This guy makes over $400,000 a year, and we're just underperforming. It's like we've got John Blake as a head coach, and we're going 3-8, and I want to go hire Bob Stoops. When I see something that's broken, I want to go fix it." So, sports analogy, it's not terribly too uncommon from politicians. But Chris, you and I were talking about this week, and Carmen, you too. I mean, this was a little surprising because this just seemed to be not his style. One, he doesn't talk about the Sooners a lot. He didn't go to OU. Yeah, he went to OSU. But for some, and Nolan did the interview, I don't know what his tone was, but for some this seemed like kind of a abrasive comment or kind of an aggressive comment that is not really the governor's style. No,
I was really struck by it. I was on the campaign most of last year. I spent 10 months on the road, much of it with Kevin Stitt. And he never really criticized people, and I don't think it's his nature really to do that. And that quote, the other thing about Kevin Stitt that I don't, that kind of didn't ring true to me about that was that I don't think he's that big a sports fan. He's an Aggie. I am an OU grad and an OU Sooners football fan, and I wouldn't have remembered John Blake's record. I knew it was dismal, but 3-8, I don't think I would have been able to pluck out like that. So I'm curious about the origin of that whole quote, really, and I kind of wonder how he felt the next day reading it. Like I said, it's just not in his nature to go after people like that. But he's also going after the higher regions. It's a constitutional body. The chancellor, Glenn Johnson, former member of the state legislature and a former university president in Oklahoma, is chosen by the regents and retained by the regents if they're happy with his work. The thrust of the Stitt administration early on has been to sort of consolidate power and the executive branch power in the governor's office, and this one is just kind of outside that realm of agencies like the Healthcare Financing Authority or Department of Corrections or something. I mean, higher education is kind of its own kingdom, its own fiefdom. So I don't know, we had a colleague refer to it as Trumpian, and it kind of was, it was almost as if he was trying to humiliate him or bully him in some way to try to effectuate some kind of change that he couldn't get otherwise.
Yeah.
If anything, the quote kind of reminded me of, Stitt has this quote, and he used it more when he was pushing for the agency accountability bills, where he got the power to hire and fire 5 new agency heads. And he also used a sports quote in talking about that. And I think it also referenced Bob Stoops, because he would basically say, I want to hire a coach for the Sooners and maybe I get to hire Bob Stoops, but, I'm totally butchering his quote, but he's comparing himself to Bob Stoops, and he's saying, I'm Bob Stoops. I'm coaching the Sooners, and yet I can't hire my defensive coach. I can't hire I don't know the different coaches on a football team.
Come on, no. I see what you're saying. I mean, and sports is a common analogy to use in politics, and evoking Bob Stoops' name is probably always a good idea. Well, maybe for half the state here in Oklahoma. I think
a little more than half.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is that. You talked about the first months of his administration was consolidating power, gaining that power, putting people in director positions where he could quickly do that. Has he now, and I know he's still got a few of those to go, but has he kind of exhausted that immediate reach, and now he's starting to look at areas where, the governor doesn't traditionally, pick these people? Is he growing frustrated, and now he's going to go public with his frustrations? Should we expect to see more of this where the governor is being aggressive and saying, this person's not good, I don't have the power to fire them, but I'm going to use my bully pulpit?
Well, I was talking to Chris earlier this week, and I said, I wonder if this is an early indication that he could ask the legislature next year to put something on the ballot to give him authority over, the state regents, or the fact that maybe he got more power this year and the legislature gave it to him pretty willingly, and so maybe he's going to try to push for more power through the legislature or through a ballot process.
Yeah, and which is what it would take with higher ed. They would have to put it on the ballot, as they did with the Department of Human Services, which was also a commission in which the director was hired or retained by that commission. But, I also have gotten the impression, I've been kind of following the process for replacing a couple of Supreme Court, state Supreme Court justices. He's got 2 vacancies. And I'm starting to kind of get the impression that he wants to do away with this process that Oklahoma has had since the 60s, I think. There's a big judicial bribery scandal in the 60s where the nominees are there's a commission that whittles down the applicants to like 3 people, and then the governor can only choose from those 3 people. Maybe, kind of over or misinterpreting what's been said to me, but it almost sounds like he would rather just go out and pick the person and then maybe have Senate confirmation than rather go through this process, that kind of lengthy process where he's presented with 3 options. You've got to pick one of these. Yeah. So to get to your question, I don't think he's done trying to, give the governor more control over things but that's it's not going to be as easy as those first 5.
Yeah. And we've talked about that before. I mean, especially early on in his tenure, still pretty early on, not even a year in, that, this is a CEO who's used to having the final say on everything. And, for a guy that hasn't really paid too much attention to politics in the past, you think governor's got to be the most powerful person in Oklahoma politics, but you quickly learn that you don't quite have as much power as you think. You get blamed for a lot of things, but you don't always have the opportunity to, hire and fire like you would from a CEO perspective.
Right. That has to go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say Oklahoma is unique in that regard because we do have more of a weak governorship model, whereas other states, the governors are able to do more and hire more and fire more.
Right. I mean, and there were some examples, on the campaign trail that he uses after that whole health department scandal with the missing money that was found in a federal account. He couldn't fire the health department director after the series of just terrible missteps in administering the death penalty a few years ago. Mary Fallon couldn't fire the Department of Corrections director. So, their hands are tied in ways that most people probably don't understand.
Is this? You think this is a new strategy then? I mean, for those positions, he doesn't have that ability that he's got to convince a board. I mean, the chair of the state regent says they don't plan to make a change. I'm sure he went to them first and expressed that. In fact, the story said that. But is this now, what you do when you're a governor who assumingly still has high favorability ratings and is still in that kind of honeymoon period where you say, hey, the people were with me a year ago. I think they're still with me now, and I'm going to try to win this battle in the court of public opinion.
It could work. It could backfire because now that all of this is out in the public, which, sorry, we are newspaper reporters. We love all this out in the public. But, the state regents might hold their ground even more and not be willing to give an inch to Kevin Stitt after this.
Yeah, I agree. it could backfire. And it's this one. This one is going to be unusual if he persists. If he continues to try to force Glenn Johnson out using the quote bully pulpit. I think it could hurt him ultimately.
Yeah.
Plus, the bully pulpit, I don't know how helpful it is here, because who really knows what the state chancellor for higher education, I mean, how many average people who think very highly of Kevin Stitt are like, oh yeah, I know exactly what the state chancellor of higher ed does and who that person is.
And you're probably just trying to tap into that general sentiment of government doesn't know what they're doing, and this outsider's coming in and trying to shake things up. Hey, and maybe we're making too big of a deal of this quote. It just didn't seem like something he would just say off the top of his head.
No, I agree.
Which kind of brought some attention to it. And it tells me that this is a battle he's willing, to have. I'm sure there's other battles that he's not going to waste his time with. He's going to try to pick the low-hanging fruit. But this one seemed like one he was going to go after.
And Carmen was saying this earlier this week. It's sort of like the gaming compact, the approach that he took to telling the public that we need to renegotiate these games. He actually had said that during the campaign. A few of the candidates did, but he essentially announced that in a newspaper column, and I think without contacting as far as we know, without making any contact with the tribes, hey, this is coming. I think they were really insulted by it, and I think it probably set back their relationship. There's there are wounds there. Now you're having special interest groups form on both sides. It was an unusual way to go about such a sensitive.
Yeah, and he walked that back a little. I mean, I don't know if he didn't walk back his position, but he when the tribes responded, he didn't keep that kind of aggressiveness up to say, no, I'm going to get this done. He's like, okay, I think we can figure this out. I mean, maybe I wasn't trying to go, just not inform you of this. So, but yeah, you're right. I mean, maybe we're starting to see now a governor who's hitting those areas where he's like, I want to make change here. I'm used to being able to do what I want. I can't do that. I'm going to go out and be outspoken about this.
And worth noting, Governor Stitt did contact the 5 tribes, leaders of the 5 tribes before the op-ed came out, but I don't think he mentioned the op-ed. And, that doesn't change the fact that the tribes definitely have hurt feelings from how that all shook out.
Right.
Yeah. The response was interesting to me on Twitter this week and sharing this story, Nolan's story and this quote. There was kind of 3 types of responses. One was just football fans. I mean, it was odd to me. There were a lot of people who were just their responses were nothing more than just like, yeah, football. Like, I mean, I didn't know where they fell on the matter.
Man.
They were just like, I'm happy that the Sooner football is being used in the political realm because we just want to continue to expand that. I mean, there were Republicans, some that said, hey, we support the governor and do this. But Democrats, I mean, their response, and this is a pretty easy one to formulate, is that you're not giving higher ed enough money to do the things that you're wanting to do, and you're using him as a scapegoat. Now we can talk later if they are getting enough money and that kind of thing. But that was kind of the initial response from the Democrats, was that this you're barking up the wrong tree here.
Higher ed, it's been cut brutally through the last few years, which led to a lot of the tuition hikes. But I don't think it got near. They didn't even try to bump it up to anywhere near it was before all the budget problems.
No, and higher ed is an interesting thing right now because it's become so partisan. I mean, everything has become partisan. But I think it was Pew last year or 2 years ago at least, very recently, had done a survey, does a regular survey to see where Democrats and Republicans the importance of higher education. And I think the question was, does higher education have a positive impact on society? The majority of Democrats said yes. The majority of Republicans several years ago also said yes. Now there's a deep partisan divide. The majority of Democrats still say yes. The majority of Republicans say no. Now you'd have to unpack that a little bit. But there is, like I said, everything's become partisan now. You ask anybody what they think of something, they're gonna think, well, how should I think in my corner? But there is this kind of animosity towards higher education.
I was at a Tom Cole in Chickasha at a town hall meeting that Tom Cole was holding the other night. Some guy stood up and just went off on. It was the usual, all these liberal professors trying to indoctrinate kids. And it's just like, this 10-minute screed about it. And I assume this is a mainly Republican audience down there in Republican Grady County just to see Tom Cole. But you're right. I mean, it was just probably backed up by nothing but
Yeah.
whatever he'd seen in whatever media he watches.
And campuses have become kind of the arena for some of these partisan fights.
And it's not the first time.
No, and it's not. But so when I read, I think it was Minority Leader Virgin, who represents Norman. When she, her quote on the story was that we're not properly funding higher ed. You need to do that first. I think Stitt probably understands that a lot of Republicans, especially in rural areas, are skeptical of higher ed. And whether the impression is true or not, when they go to some of these campuses, I mean, they see the buildings being built and the big football stadiums, and we know that those are, it's a lot more to it. It's not coming out of education budgets, but that's not the perception.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would imagine the governor also feels like he has quite a bit of supporters on his side who feel like higher ed maybe is getting too much money, or at least not spending the money they're getting wisely.
I think there's kind of a historical distrust in Oklahoma of, I don't want to use intellectualism, whatever it might be, education. There are parts of the state where it's much more pronounced.
Yeah. Well, an example of an urban-rural divide, if you will, and I think we're seeing potentially another one as we switch gears here, the permitless carry debate. We thought it was over. It's not quite over. The first bill that Governor Stitt signs this year, permitless carry, that allows most individuals to carry a gun without training or a license, is set to take effect November 1st. Representative Lowe, an Oklahoma City Democrat, along with some other groups, started an initiative petition. Carmen, can catch us up. Where are we at on this? What's this petition? What are they seeking to do, and how long do they have?
Yeah, so basically, Mom's Demand, Representative Lowe, people who are opposed to this bill taking effect have until next Thursday that's August 29th at 5 p.m. to turn in. Either they have 60,000 approximately valid signatures of people who want to put this on a ballot next year to have a statewide vote on this issue, or if they don't get that required number of signatures, then the bill goes forward and becomes law on November 1.
And so if they get the signatures, it would delay the implementation of the
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Until the statewide vote.
And would go to a statewide vote. Chris, how do you guess that vote would go?
Well, I think I said I think people voted on this when they elected Kevin Stitt. It was a main issue of difference between him and Democrat Drew Edmondson, and Stitt won basically every rural county.
Yeah.
And you had the vote overwhelming in 2018 and 2019. In 2018, Governor Fallin vetoed it. 2019, they overwhelmingly approve it, and the governor signs it. So you've had the people's representatives, and by proxy, the people themselves, I think, speak to this.
Yeah. And I say an urban-rural divide because Lowe, an Oklahoma City Democrat, we've seen Councilwoman Jo Beth Hammond from Oklahoma City. She's trying to put together a resolution for the council to show support. Mayor David Holt, a moderate Republican, has said that he had signed the petition, has not said how he would vote if it came to a vote. I mean, what we've talked about this too, not on the podcast, but over the last couple of weeks. Carmen, Lowe is leading this charge. Some anti-gun groups are leading this charge. Liberal, councilwoman and members of Oklahoma City's political sphere are a part of this. But I have not seen the larger Democratic caucus rally behind this effort.
Yeah, I mean, I think, how do I put this? I think they have gotten involved because they've been, I saw like Forrest Bennett got called out on Twitter the other day. Like somebody tweeted at him and was like, hey, did you sign this? After Mayor Holt announced that he had signed it. And Representative Bennett, he said that, yes, I signed it. But I don't think the Democrats are really coming out fully to support it. And it does sort of go back to that rural-urban divide. Like I talked to Representative Perryman yesterday, who's out in Chickasha. He's stepping down when his term ends, but he's one of the last few rural Democrats in the legislature. And he kind of said, I totally see where Representative Lowe is coming from. If I represented a very urban district, I would be trying to get this, repealed immediately. But he talked about how it's different when you're in a rural district, and basically people in rural areas, he said, would not let those who are untrained or incapable of using a firearm correctly from carrying a firearm. And when you're a city, there's a difference. If a gun accidentally goes off in a city, it's different than if you're in rural Oklahoma and there's nothing but cows and grass around
potentially.
you.
I mean, there's a cultural divide. I would imagine if the Democratic caucus was going to come, stand behind Lowe on this, I mean, that would hurt your chances in 2020, right? If you're trying to actually win some of these rural seats.
It's not a winning issue for Democrats. By the way, Lowe is an Oklahoma City Democrat, right?
Yeah.
It's not at all a winning issue for, I don't, in this state or nationally. I mean, that was, and ever since 1994, the election cycle where it was Bill Clinton's first 2 years in office. Democrats controlled both houses of Congress. They passed the Brady bill, which is the waiting period for buying a handgun, and then they passed a crime bill that included a ban on semi-automatic weapons. That fall, Democrats got annihilated, including the Speaker of the House at that time, Tom Foley, who had a district in the state of Washington that had a lot of rural, near Spokane and outside of that. I think Oklahoma wound up with one Democrat in its delegation after that, after having a majority Democrat. And so I don't give you chapter and verse about it, but back in 2019 or 2009 and 10, Obama's first 2 years, the Democrats had the House and Senate large majorities in both, and in fact, kind of a 60-vote majority in the Senate. They didn't even try to do gun control, and it's for this very reason. It's not a winning issue for them. I mean, the NRA is very powerful. At that time, there was still what we referred to then as centrists and moderate Democrats. They're kind of few and far between now. And it just wipes them out. Those are the people who get wiped out, and after gun votes, are people who are from these rural areas or moderate Democrats who, push comes to shove, they might vote for gun restriction, but they really don't want to. And Tom Cole the other night, he was getting just screamed at in Norman on this issue at a town hall. He said, look, this can be a state issue. Guns can be a state issue. It's not up to the federal government on every single thing. And then he's absolutely correct, really. I mean, as far as Supreme Court decisions have gone on Second Amendment since Heller, they haven't taken one up, but they have let state and city restrictions stand on handgun possession and on semi-automatic weapon possession. So if Oklahoma City really wants to take on guns, Oklahoma City can pass gun restrictions. They don't have to just get behind this and do kind of what's really just a show vote on Tuesday, right? About hey, we don't like
saying we support this effort.
Pass an ordinance saying you can't have semi-automatics in Oklahoma City. The Supreme Court has let stand a ban on semi-automatics in Illinois. In an Illinois town.
But the legislature here often passes bills that preempts the authority from
they can
localities.
then
do that, yeah.
They haven't done it
They
yet.
probably would, but you're right. I mean, that would be.
They could come along and do that.
Yeah.
But like I said, if the city wants to make a real stand on guns and pass some gun restrictions in Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
I personally think it would be fascinating to see the electorate that would turn out if this measure were on the ballot and if Medicaid expansion were on the ballot at the same time. And then, whatever regular election it is, whether
Donald Trump.
Yeah. So I can't even imagine what that would look like.
I hope they just do them in different elections just so we can really study each one individually. We're not going to get that probably. But
It'll be up to Stitt, right?
Yeah.
What ballot he puts them on.
Yeah, it won't necessarily be November. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. The city council vote is on Tuesday. I think that's interesting. City Hall reporter Bill Crum, I think, reported that at least 2 or 3 councilors have already said they're not going to support this. A couple, including Hammond, says that they are. Don't know where the mayor is at on this. Once again, he said he tweeted a photo of his signature on it, but has not said that he would support this initiative. You have, and I think it's interesting. You're starting to see the continued leaning left of Oklahoma City politics, at least in the core. I mean, I think it's fair to say, and I imagine she probably would wear this label with honor. But Jo Beth Hammond's probably one of the most progressive or liberal politicians in the state, based on what we've seen early on. James Cooper, just north of her, on the city council, has also said he would support it. So we're also kind of seeing that kind of move to the left, at least within kind of the urban core of Oklahoma City, and I think this effort kind of shows that. And then you have a mayor once again, and we don't want to get too much in this because I want to end with
Does he
talking about
have
the town
to
hall.
vote?
But yeah, he's a voting member on the council.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he doesn't have to vote, but he tweeted, and this has kind of become common for him. He tweets something in a way that a lot of those on the left say that they appreciate, right? And part of that may be because they still view him as a Republican, even though he's in a non-partisan office. But when he comes out and he says something, positive about the immigrant community in light of what the president's saying, a lot of Democrats may say, "Hey, look, finally a Republican who's saying, something that we want to hear, even if it's not quite as forceful as we want."
Right.
But it's not as forceful as they want. There's still kind of a line that he's walking, maybe wisely so. It might be good politics. But on this issue, he said, "I support the petition, I support the right to vote," but didn't say that he was against permitless carry.
Yeah, which makes me wonder why he tweeted. I mean, he seemed to be kind of like trying to walk that tightrope. And maybe he could do that in Oklahoma County if he were to seek elective office again, partisan elected office again. But he's already, in those tweets alone, just by not coming out, four square against this petition, hurt himself with rural Republicans and Republicans who believe not coming out against sanctuary cities is basically an endorsement of them, and which is kind of what happened with Mick Cornett last year.
Although it's a fine line, and we talk about the swing to the left in parts of Oklahoma City, but there's still a lot of conservatives in the city. There's still a lot of powerful conservatives that he, I think wisely is probably he needs to bridge that gap, right? And it's probably getting pretty tough. I mean, most cities have kind of swung one way or the other, and Oklahoma City may be one of your true last purple cities left. And part of that may just because our boundaries are so big that we extend into some areas other cities don't. But we'll have to wait and see how he and the others vote on Tuesday. Well, as we wrap up here, so Chris, you've been on the road this week, going to some town halls. Congress is in recess. You're writing about this on Sunday. It sounded like the audiences, whether they were in urban or rural, just kind of had some consistent questions.
Yeah, one of the overarching themes to me was Donald Trump, not just his policies, but Donald Trump and the things that he tweets and the impact that they have. I mean, in Norman, to get back to the liberal campus, there was like a lecture hall of 200 people, most of whom were not friendly, probably not registered Republicans, and they were. I don't want to say like jeering at Cole's answers, but they're clearly not happy with him just saying, "Look, it's not my fault. I don't tweet it." There's this kind of demand, this expectation, I think, among some people who are really offended by Trump, that everybody come out forcefully against the things that he says, including Republicans. And they didn't in Norman or in Chickasha later this week accept the explanation that, hey, I don't like it. I wish he wouldn't do it. I think what they want is, for people to speak more forcefully about it. And there's just a lot, and even in Yukon, a very small gathering with Frank Lucas, who's, big agriculture guy. Neither of these guys ever come out for Trump. Cole and Lucas. They're not Trump fans. But they have to walk a line with it too. Just as David Holt has to walk one, they kind of have to walk a line on this. And I'm sure that early on, maybe in Trump's candidacy, but definitely in his presidency, anything that was said by them that might be interpreted as not fully supportive or negative probably resulted in Facebook insults on their Facebook pages, calls to their offices, and which obviously Tom Cole or Frank Lucas are not sitting in their office answering. It's kids, these young people that work for them who had to take whatever abuse was, being spewed. So I would never predict that Trump wouldn't win Oklahoma next year and probably every county again. Maybe every county again, but there are a lot of people who are not on board with his with his whole deal.
Yeah, and that probably is not going to impact the race. In 4 out of the 5 congressional seats, but maybe in 5. We talked about that. Be interested to see what Trump's presence on the ballot the things that he says that really emboldens Republican voters in Lucas's district and Cole's district, it may actually work in the favor of Kendra Horn.
Yeah, it could. I think that's saying, I agree. There's, in order for Kendra Horn, a Democrat from Oklahoma City who beat an incumbent Republican for that congressional seat last year, in order for her to win, she had to have attracted Republican votes because it's a majority Republican district. And I believe the votes that she got are the ones that you wrote about in a piece last year: Republican women in Edmond and Deer Creek,
In northwest part of the
in
city,
northwest part of this district. And I think those same voters are probably just repulsed by a lot of what Trump does. And so if Horn is to keep that seat, she's probably going to have to win them again. And I would say she's got a chance to win those.
Yeah, but I would also say that, like, Republicans putting up their own female candidates this time, Terry Neese and Stephanie Bice, those women probably have a better chance of capturing those Republican female voters that are repulsed by Trump, but they do want to vote for a woman, and they want a woman who maybe feels like they understand them. So
I would agree with you, except the things they're saying in the primary now.
Yeah, both of them are gonna have to side with Trump on things they won't be able to walk back from.
When it comes to the general, yeah.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting about 2020 and Horn, and when you look at areas like northwest Oklahoma City and the Edmond and Deer Creek suburbs, where it seems like there are votes up for grab, or she was able to flip, and she did. My impression, just being on the ground, reporting on this, very anecdotal, and then looking at the actual results afterwards, was a lot of these suburban women were really focused primarily on Drew Edmondson. In fact, it's what made us think that he may have a shot, and it didn't really even come all that close. But I think the teacher walkout really put education in their mind, and a lot of them said that Drew Edmondson seemed like the governor that had a plan for education.
That's true.
Was going to support higher education. Now, some of these women told me, more than once, had said, I grew up in a household where it was a sin to vote for a Democrat. Some of them were actually, you could tell that there was a lot of soul searching, even to come to the point of saying, I'm going to vote for Drew Edmondson. And it seemed like once they got there, then they started looking at the rest of the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these women voted for Nicole Miller, a Republican representative who won an open seat in the Deer Creek, northwest Oklahoma City area. I think a lot of them then also voted for Kendra Horn. Mm-hmm. Seeing her, felt like she was a supporter of education, felt like she was a Democrat, but a moderate Democrat, and someone that they could kind of see themselves in. Once you're on that side,
exactly,
you're going to continue to support.
I remember somebody saying, and this whole thing happened in Oklahoma in the reverse. All people who had voted for Democrats all their lives, wound up voting for so many Republicans. I remember back in the 80s, somebody said, I just voted for so many Republicans, I got a nosebleed, but eventually they became comfortable with it, more comfortable with it than voting for Democrats. So, the same thing could happen here in Oklahoma County with Republicans voting for Democrats.
Yeah. Well, obviously the Horn race is going to be the topic of conversation for many future episodes of Political State. Chris, I mentioned you've got the story on Sunday. Carmen, you've got a story coming up. You're actually going to be talking to the governor about what he thinks about the permitless carry repeal effort. I imagine he's still on board.
Yeah, he signed it. He seems pretty in favor.
He's still on that, and so a couple stories coming this weekend. So, that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Political State podcast with Chris Castillo, Carmen Foreman. I'm Ben Felder with the Oklahoman. Thanks for joining us this week, and we'll see you again for another episode of Political State.